Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, the first show of 2019. And joining us right now, this is going to be a new weekly segment that we have here on the Chad Hasty Show as we gear up for the 86th legislative session. The editor of Quorum Report, Scott Braddock, joining us today on the program. And normally on most weeks, we'll visit with him early on in the week to find out what's going on down in Austin. And we welcome Scott Braddock here onto the Chad Hasty Show. Scott, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, and in fact, did I hear you say it's 26 degrees there?
Yeah, it's
something like that. It's a balmy
chilly.
37 here in Austin. We got rain. There's no. By the way, I thought it was pretty funny that in the year 2019, as we get rolling here, the technology is so good and meteorology has advanced so much that basically the forecast is either something will happen or nothing will happen.
Yes, that's basically it.
We've got it down. Yeah.
It's either nothing's going to happen and move along, or a total shutdown of the city.
I think I've done that forecast before in Houston and Dallas.
Well, we've got the legislative session starts in about, 6 days now?
Yes, sir.
And kind of walk us through what we're seeing, because you and I, we had a conversation about this, and you know, without even talking to each other at first, we both had kind of the same thought that this is looking like a real meat and potato legislative session. That there's not a lot of other side issues so far leading up to this legislative session.
You know, when the state Republican leadership, the statewide Republican office holders, beat their Democratic opponents by 21 points 4 years ago, they kind of had license to do whatever they wanted to do, right? I mean, this is the way elections work, and it's cliche, right, to say that elections have consequences, but they do. And when you have Republicans barely win their races, I think, by the way, mainstream media, national media, really just hyping Beto. Of course, you mentioned that Elizabeth Warren was cracking open a beer on social media. I saw one of the tweets that really made me laugh this morning was that picture along with Beto O'Rourke in the kitchen. He was making whatever he's making, and looks like the Democratic field is going to look more like America's Top Chef than a race for the presidency. But look, this whole thing where you have this time around the Republicans barely win, when they sort of had license to do whatever they wanted to do, and they sure did that in the last legislative session in 2017, arguing about a bathroom bill where people could go to the bathroom for about 18 months, all told, and then now talking more about reducing your property taxes, which I'm sure every one of your listeners would like them to get really serious about that, no matter what the specific proposal is going to be, or at least rein in those property taxes. That's the way it's being framed up by the lieutenant governor and others. When they barely win, they need to really pay attention to what it is the voters want to do. And right now it's sort of like a landmine field for the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the person we're calling the presumptive speaker, Dennis Bonnen, who we can talk more about if you like, a gentleman from Houston area. They're trying to navigate this political landscape and hope that whatever they do doesn't blow up in their faces, because looking ahead to the next election, it sure could.
Well, and it is the lack of, I don't know if the bathroom bill would have come up again, or let's just say a bathroom bill-like piece of legislation. Is it as a result of the election that we just had, or is it a result of, one, the governor I never felt was totally on board with that type of legislation anyway, but they're also trying to fill out, hey, we're going to have a new speaker. We don't know how we're all going to work together. Is it a mix of that? I mean, what are we really seeing?
We're seeing a real changing of the guard in Austin. I mean, keep in mind, the last speaker, Joe Strauss, who's retiring now, he was there for 10 years. I mean, that's a record-tying time in office. There are people working in Austin today as either legislative staffers or lawmakers themselves or some lobbyists, consultants, etc. They've been working in Austin, during the Joe Strauss era, and for some of them, they've never worked under any other speaker. They have no frame of reference for how it's going to work going forward, going from January all the way through the 5-month session, and then knock on wood here, we don't have a special session about something silly. If they do have a special session, hopefully it's about something that everybody actually cares about and that average Texans care about. But look, there were real Texans who cared about the bathroom bill. If you ask people, and I'm sure you talked about this on the program, if you ask folks, should men be allowed in women's rooms? everyone will say no. Even Democrats will say no to that. Some pretty liberal people. But if you ask people, what's your priority, just sort of openly ask them that, bathrooms will never come up.
Right.
They would say immigration. They would say the economy. They would say health care. They would say the taxes that I pay. That would absolutely be number one as far as what the legislature has jurisdiction over. And so it seems that's the stuff that's going to be focused on. But I would say this, and you sort of, I think, framed it up the right way by saying maybe a bathroom bill or something that's like a bathroom bill or just something that's sort of red meat conservative legislation. I'd say you're still going to see some of that. I'm not going to make any predictions, and this may frustrate you as we go forward here, Chad. I don't make predictions. People always want me to make predictions, and I always say to them, yeah, because all of the folks in the media sure knew that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency.
Right.
I had sort of gotten evangelical about journalists not making predictions before that, but I don't think it's helpful for the audience. My thing is, I think we owe it to our audience to give them a clear-eyed view of what's going on to help them understand what's happening in real time. And so if you throw out an issue like abortion, for example, and you have a newly constituted Supreme Court, which who knows which way they would go, if there was a real challenge to the status quo on that issue, it may be that they would side with the conservatives who may want to ban abortion outright. We will see. It was always the chatter in Austin that leadership did not want to pass something that would outright ban abortion because it would never stand up, to a Supreme Court challenge. That could be different now, and I think if any state's going to lead the charge on that, it would be Texas, right? And so we'll see. And you have to remember that even though some Republicans are sort of looking over their right and left shoulders now, because you have Republicans who have to navigate their primary, then they have to get through the general election, specifically in the suburbs. I think that's where a lot of Republicans are really nervous now because of the way the numbers came out in the last election. They think they might get beaten by Democrats. But for the vast majority of Republican office holders, it is still the case that the only election that matters is their Republican primary, and that's the election they'll go through first. So if there are, sort of the gut check red meat issues that are on the floor of the House or the Senate, Republicans are going to vote for those things. Then it'll be up to them to explain to their voters why they did that. And I think for most of them, they're in Lubbock. I think your state representatives get elected, something north of 75% support. So in places like Lubbock and around the rest of rural Texas, that's going to be the case. But for those folks who are from the cities and from the suburbs, they have a different calculus.
Yeah, visiting with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report here on the Chad Hasty Show. So, let's take a quick look at the two top issues, or maybe three issues, going into this legislation as a legislative session. As far as we know right now, what are they?
They are property taxes. That's absolutely number one. The presumptive speaker, Dennis Bonnen from Angleton, he announced that he had 109 commitments for speaker. So everyone in Austin is operating as if he's going to be the guy. He's been asked this, and he says, look, the top three issues for me are property taxes, and property taxes. That's what people in the state are rightly upset about. Homeowners and business owners alike are upset about how much they're paying. And this has been, by the way, to the Lieutenant Governor's credit, to Dan Patrick's credit, he has been talking about this issue for at least 15 years, before he was even in office, when he was a radio talk show host in Houston. He put voters on buses and took them from Houston to the Capitol to protest high property taxes in the state, really driven out of Harris County originally, but it's a pain that people are feeling. That, of course, goes hand in hand with school finance, because when people get that property tax bill, what's the biggest line item in that bill? It's your independent school district and how much you're paying for public education. The outgoing Speaker of the House, Joe Straus, has said that if you want to reduce people's property taxes, you have to sort of rebuild and rethink the way that schools are paid for in Texas, and you have to balance the fact that people want to pay less in property taxes against the fact that the state constitution says that every kid all over the state is going to get an equitable education. The difficult part about that, of course, is that to me, this is maybe a little down in the weeds, but this is the way I operate at QuorumReport.com. That's where I live, down in the weeds. The fact is, it's not possible for every kid in Texas to have an equitable education. That's why this is so hard. A kid who lives in Highland Park, in one of the richest neighborhoods in Texas, in the Dallas area, they're going to get a different education than the person who lives in East El Paso County, one of the poorest areas of the state. But it is something we strive for. It is one of our values, and it's something that the legislators are going to grapple with. Beyond that, they need to address Harvey funding. The hurricane that hit the Gulf Coast. They're still probably looking at about a $2 billion price tag for that, at least from the state level. And then beyond that, we'll see what else they get to.
Yeah, and none of this is going to come easy.
No. All of this is everything I'm talking about is very, very expensive. Now, you have heard, and I mentioned it's a rainy, nasty day here in Austin. You have heard that the Rainy Day Fund is going to have about $12 billion in it as lawmakers convene this month. Well, they have set a floor for that, Chad, at $7.5 billion. By statute, lawmakers are required to say, here's the minimum amount that has to be in the savings account for the state. The minimum amount they said is $7.5 billion. So they're on track to spend almost half of that after years and years of, and you've heard this over and over again from Republican leadership, that it should be a very rare thing that any withdrawal is made from the Rainy Day Fund. But Lieutenant Governor Patrick said during the Republican convention in San Antonio, the state Republican convention, that the years of conservative leadership that has resulted in such a large Rainy Day Fund means that money is now available during what looks to be hard times. And, of course, as you know, that's funded through oil and gas severance taxes. And we're starting the new year with gas, with the price of crude now under, because everybody gets all excited that the price of gasoline is under $2. The price of crude is under $50. It's at $46.82 as I'm talking to you. And for Texas to make good on the obligations that it has and to fund that Rainy Day Fund, it really ought to be closer to $60 a barrel. So we're going into what may be a very tight budget.
Yeah. Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. We're going to be visiting with Scott throughout the legislative session and beyond, and get into all the, get down into the weeds, I guess, of what's going down in Austin. And, of course, when we take the show on the road down to Austin, we'll have Scott on the program then as well. Scott, tell folks about Quorum Report and quorumreport.com.
I often say that the Quorum Report is the community newspaper for the Texas Capitol because most of my audience it's the real insiders. It's lawmakers, their staffers, lobbyists, consultants, etc., political professionals. But we welcome everybody, especially during the legislative session, to watch the greatest show in Texas unfold in real time. They can check us out at quorumreport.com. They can sign up for our free email updates as things are happening at the Texas Legislature during the session. Those will go out in real time so that they can see what is going on. It's really the inside view of what's happening. Like as we said, it's the warning. Yeah. We get down in the weeds. That's where we live. But we also try to give you the bottom line every day about what's really unfolding at the Texas Capitol, at your Texas Capitol. And I know that, from my years in talk radio, that your audience is certainly astute. They know what's going on, and they probably want to know the story under the story, and that's what we try to give them.
Absolutely. Scott, before I let you go, we just had a listener who sent in a question for you.
Yeah.
And it was about the Rainy Day Fund. And basically, in a nutshell, what is the Rainy Day Fund? And then they ask, is it invested anywhere?
It's really not. I was talking to Glenn Hager, the comptroller, over the last year. He's got a proposal to invest the dollars, sort of endowment style. Right now, it's $12 billion that are sitting there like overnight cash, drawing 1% interest, and that's your money. That fund is funded through oil and gas severance taxes, and as I mentioned, oil is under $50 a barrel as we start this year, so that makes it tougher to refill. When they first started the Rainy Day Fund years ago, it's actually called the Economic Stabilization Fund, and the reason they called it that is because it's funded by oil and gas revenues, and oil and gas, of course, is a boom and bust business. Sometimes you have a surge in the market, sometimes things bottom out, and as, of course, they knew after the oil bust of the 80s, you can have serious problems if you're trying to fund the government that way. So what they did was they said, okay, we're going to create a savings account. When things are good, we'll put money in savings like you would at your house, and then when things are bad, we can take money out. And what they noticed when they wrote the legislation to create the Rainy Day Fund, what they observed and what they used to inform their creation of it was that when the economy goes south, usually demand for government services goes up because more people need assistance. So that's why you set it aside for the hard times and don't just go spending it all the time. Although the idea that it's called a Rainy Day Fund can be a little misleading because then people think that it's only for those one-time We can only spend it, when there's a crisis, some sort of emergency. The truth was the framers of the rainy day fund, if you will, what they envisioned was that it would be used to smooth out government revenue so that they would not have to increase your taxes whenever there were hard times, and that's why it's there.
Very nice. Scott Braddock, quorumreport.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at Scott Braddock. Appreciate your time, and we'll visit with you next week.
Looking forward to it, Chad. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Scott Braddock of quorumreport.com. Follow him on Twitter, Scott Braddock.